I'm going to try to avoid sharing screen as much as I can. Okay, now that I've burned through 3 out of my 30 minutes, let's get started. My session source sheet is in the beginning of the packet, so you'll be turning to page 2. And I'm going to share just so that people can see. This is packet. I am speaking about wearing a mask taught me how to speak. And starts right here on the source sheet. The first source that I have on the sheet, I wanted to share it because I really like this line. And I was very disappointed to find out that no one can really determine whether George Bernard Shaw said this or not. It's a great line, and it's the sort of thing that I think he would have said, which I imagine is why it's attributed to him. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Okay, the actual quote, as best as I can find, comes from source number 2, an article that appeared in Fortune in 1950 by a fellow by the name of William H. White called The Illusion of Communication. I believe he also has a book called The Illusion of Communication, in which he says the great enemy of communication we find is the illusion of it. We have talked enough, but we have not listened. And by not listening, we have failed to concede the immense complexity of our society, and thus the great gaps between ourselves and those with whom we seek understanding. So I find that to be such a great way to frame the problem. We often think that we're communicating clearly, and we proceed on that basis. And when the people to whom we're speaking don't understand what we're trying to say, then number one, the agenda doesn't get executed. Number 2, we become resentful. Why didn't they respond the way that I anticipated they would respond? It frustrates the listener, who doesn't understand why you're frustrated at all, because they didn't understand what you were talking about. They thought they were doing what you asked. It damages our personal existence, it damages our social existence, it creates strife. So on a social level, inadequate communication is a disaster. And from a Torah perspective, inadequate communication is a disaster. It leads to enmity between people, it leads to pirud, division in the community, it leads to destruction of shalom bayis, peace in the home. It leads, of course, to lashon hara, harmful speech, poor education of children, bad relationships between parents and children, and so on. Everything that the Torah is trying to accomplish, essentially, can be undermined by poor communication. And what I have found for myself in the course of the pandemic is that wearing a mask around people has actually helped lead me down paths of communication that are more productive, which I realize sounds a little counterintuitive because masks inhibit communication. Nonetheless, bear with me, and I think you'll see what I'm getting at here. None of what I have to say is particularly novel. I think that probably we have 57 people on the 57 screens on the on this Zoom. I figured that means that there are 57 people at least who probably could have figured all this out themselves and already understand it. Nonetheless, maybe because I'm connecting it with some sources in Torah, I'm providing some value added. So fundamentally, I think a lot of the challenge that we have in terms of communication can be remedied with an understanding of what communication is really about from the perspective of Torah. The Zohar talks about the value of human speech before Hashem. And I think I'm not going to share my screen back and forth. I just put the link for the source packet again in the chat for those who want to download it. But listen to this line, and I'm just reading my English translation out loud. Those who miss the Aramaic, you can get it off of the source sheet. Even the breath of a person's mouth has a place and a position, and God does with it what he does. Meaning, even a person's breath is special before God and is preserved. Even a person's word, even a person's voice is not for nothing. All have a place and position. That's the Zohar in Parshas Mishpatim. Further along in the Torah, in Parshas Mitzorah, Every word of prayer that a person produces from his mouth ascends upwards and pierces heavens and enters the place above. There it is evaluated as to whether it is good or not. If it is good, it ascends before the Holy King to do its will. If not, it is moved aside. That's prayer specifically. But as a general principle, the words we speak are valued before God. From mystical perspective, they're valued before God because speech is actually a representation of the neshama of a person's soul. You see, when you learn Kabbalah, which of course people generally do, when you learn Kabbalah, you learn that the human soul has at least 3 parts, if not 5 parts. We're going to talk about 3. One is called the nefesh, one is called the ruach, and one is called the neshama. The nefesh is the part of the soul that interfaces most closely with the body. If you think of the Torah statement, Hadam hu hanefesh, that blood is the nefesh is the most concrete. Then you have the aspect of the soul that animates the body, and that is called the ruach. And then you have the aspect that engages in spiritual thought, and that is the neshama. Now, I just gave you a list of 3 and told you that that's what they are. Honestly, I don't understand it well enough to be able to give you more definition of that. In other words, I've read it and read it and read it, but really, what does that mean that there's an aspect of the soul that interfaces with the body? I think is a better question than I can give an answer to. But it's the point that I wanted to show you out of it comes from what Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin did with that idea at the end of the 18th century. You see, he argued that the 3 aspects of the soul that we just outlined are actually parallel to the 3 aspects of a person's speech. He says, when you express a word, there is a consonant. The consonant is very material. Then you have the vowel, and the vowel animates the consonant, right? If all you tried to do was say CBDR and tried to make that into a word, it wouldn't be a word. You need to have the vowel, ditto in Hebrew. And then he said, there's also the inflection, the flow of the sentence, where you put your pauses. When you read from the Torah, it's called the trop, right? That tells you where to break things up and where to place your emphasis. So that is the 3rd piece of it. And he argued that that's actually parallel. I brought it in source number 5 on the sheet. For those who have just joined, I'm going to put again I will put the link for it for the packet in the chat. But he argues that the 3 are parallel. When you speak, the consonant is parallel to your nefesh. The vowel is parallel to the ruach. And the inflection of the sentence, the way you of the words, the way you break things down, the way that you emphasize different parts of a word or different parts of a phrase, that's parallel to the neshama. You are investing your entire self in your speech. And the same thing can be true for all speech. Not just think of the words of a prayer or the words of learning Torah, but all speech. When we invest in it, speech expresses the totality of our spiritual personalities, which I think can explain a couple of mystical ideas. But I know I'm short on time, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the mystical ideas, but I wanted to point them out. Number 1, many of you probably heard this as children. I certainly heard this when I was growing up. Did you ever hear the idea, which is found in source number 6 from a Midrash, that you have a limited number of words, right? That a person has a limited, just a quick show of hands here. How many people heard this growing up? You have a limited number of words, and once you, thank you, I see some hands. Once you finish your words, you're done. That's it, all over. So this may have had, I think, an ulterior motive when they told it to me at any rate as a kid. There may have been a reason why they were saying that, having nothing to do with the Midrash. For all I know, they made it up and didn't know about the Midrash. Nonetheless, to me, the idea that your neshama lasts only as long as your speech lasts is because we view speech as an expression of the essence of a person's neshama, of a person's soul. Another idea that relates, and this we discussed a little bit in the beginning of the summer in a session on July 1st. We have an idea in Judaism that speech has power, and even unintentional speech has power. If a person says something, it can come to fruition without their even wishing it to. It's a mystical idea linked sometimes with the verse I brought you in source number 7 from Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, where he talks about kishkagashe yotzei milifnei shalit, that sometimes a ruler will say something and it's going to have an impact even if it was said by mistake. There is a mystical power associated with speech. But I want to move from the mystical to the practical. It's fun to talk about the mystical at, after 10 o'clock on a Saturday night. But let's talk practical. In the beginning of the Torah, Hashem breathes a spirit into a person, and he turns the person into nefesh chaya, that is Adam, right? Vayipach be'apav nishmat chayim. He breathed a breath of life into the man, and the man becomes what's called nefesh chaya. If you look at your sheet in source number 8, Targum Onkelos, the commentary by Onkelos on that section, on that verse in the Torah, he doesn't translate nefesh chaya the way I would have. I would have said man becomes nefesh chaya means man becomes a living spirit. And that's the way he translates the term nefesh chaya elsewhere. However, when it comes to this verse, he doesn't. He says nefesh chaya means ruach mimalala, a speaking spirit. Onkelos says that when God animates the human being by putting the soul into him, the human being becomes specifically a speaking spirit. Now, animals can communicate too, but what human beings do with their speech is they take abstract ideas and find a way to convey them to other people. Speech is our attempt to express to an outsider what we are feeling inside, how we are absorbing and responding to the world around us. And in that sense, on a very practical level, leaving the mysticism aside, it expresses our neshama. It expresses our soul. And I think if we understand that, it can change our style of communication, both listening and speaking. And the Mass can help us to implement that change. How? So I have 3 pieces that I wanted to express here. And I know I got 14 minutes to go. We're going to do it. Number 1, going on mute. When I say going on mute, I don't mean the Zoom mute, right? Where you think you're speaking, but no one can hear you because you didn't realize that you're actually muted. Or the one where the person who's hosting mutes everybody because someone has, a phone going in the background or whatever it is. I mean an intentional muting, which masking can cause. Judaism loves intentional muting for multiple purposes. I gave you a reference to the Gemara in Erchin in source number 9 on the sheet. And I'm going to read it out loud for those who have not downloaded the source sheet, although I will put the link in the chat once again. Rabbi Yochanan quoted Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra, quotes a pasuk, a verse from Tehillim, from Psalms, in which God says, what can it give you? What can it add for you? A deceitful tongue. But he turns the message a little bit differently. He has God speaking to the tongue. God says to the tongue, people have a lot of body parts that are all sort of in motion. They're all positioned to move. They're all upright. You, the tongue, you lie flat. All of a person's body parts have some kind of an external element. It's not biologically so. I mean, your kidneys don't, but you know what I mean. There are parts of the body, they're all very active. And then on the other hand, the tongue is inside. And God says, I surrounded you with 2 walls, one of bone, teeth, and one of flesh, the lips. What else could I do to keep you in line? God says. Right? Like you're dormant, you're just lying there. No one forced you to get up and move. Why is it that you just keep on going? God says to the tongue. Judaism believes that a person can benefit from personal muting, saying, I'm not going to talk. Use those lips and teeth to keep your tongue in line. Sometimes silence is valued in Judaism to enable reflection. There's an idea, which is reflected in a passage from the Jerusalem Talmud that I brought you in source number 10 on the sheet, that on Shabbos, a person should speak less. Why? Among other things, it enables reflection. There's an idea within Judaism as well that we try to be silent to express humility. I brought you on the sheet a pasuk, a verse from Ecclesiastes, in which he says, don't rush your mouth. Let your words be few. Muting has value because it can help you avoid saying things you shouldn't say, right? They always say it's the last thing you said that gets you in trouble, because after that you can't say anything else. But muting can be valuable to prevent bad speech, to enable reflection, to express humility, not to mention to enable other people to get a word in edgewise. And I feel like the mask accomplishes this for me. Because when I'm wearing a mask, it makes me ask every time I'm going to open my mouth, is this really necessary? Is it worth the effort? You know, there's an effort in communicating when you're wearing a mask, trying to get the words out, making sure you're heard and all that. And it makes you stop and think. So wearing a mask has helped me to be quiet more. Point number one. Point number two, listening. Judaism emphasizes not only the value of being mute, but also the value of listening. Listening for the sake of empathy. I brought you a passage from the Talmud which says that if a person is worried, it's in source 12 on your sheet. If a person is worried, they should find a way to talk to other people about it, because when those other people listen, they will empathize. Listening is important because it helps you learn, right? You learn by hearing from others. We read this morning's Torah reading about Hakel, about the Jews gathering to hear the Torah read once every 7 years. Listening allows me to be influenced. A week from now, God willing, we're going to blow the shofar. I will be influenced by the shofar. So much so, listening is so valued that various Jewish sources have co-opted a line from the Greeks. There was a Greek philosopher living in the end of the 1st century, beginning of the 2nd century, named Epictetus. And I'm probably mispronouncing that. I apologize to him. But he said something that I then found in later Jewish writing. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. You've heard that? So yeah, that's Greek. That's not ours. But it's more than it's more than just being quiet. You know, in the terminology of halacha, of Jewish law, muting is what we call a hechsher mitzvah. It enables you to do what you need to do. It enables us to listen. But listening means active listening. It's an activity. There's a great book by the actor Alan Alda. It's called If I Understood You, Would I Have This Look on My Face? It's a great book. He said his choice for titles was either that or Duh. He wasn't sure which one. He ended up with the longer one. But listen to this quote. He's talking about responsive listening. He says, there's a body of scientific literature on responsive listening, but I came to understand it in a personal way through my work. In acting, this kind of relating is fundamental. You don't say your next line simply because it's in the script. You say it because the other person has behaved in a way that makes you say it. Relating to them allows them to have an effect on you, to change you in a way. And that's why you respond the way you do. In what he's describing as responsive listening, you hear what somebody else is saying, and it changes you. It's a great book. I really enjoy it. Another voice from Hollywood that I think is very helpful on this is actually Steven Spielberg. There was a show, maybe it still exists, I don't know, called Inside the Actor's Studio. And there was a clip of this on YouTube at some point, but NBC pulled it down because they had the copyright. But I saw it before it was pulled down. And I will share with you the thing that Steven Spielberg said on it. He was asked about what makes him successful as a director. And he said he's developed an ear for character, an ear for dialogue that sounds real. And he said, you know where he got it from? He says, quote, it's source number 14 for those who have downloaded the source sheet. He says, I was taught by my mom and dad that in Judaism, the most important prayer is Shema Yisrael. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And it was taught to me from childhood that the most important thing I could do as a Jew was to listen. So listening carefully is what I was taught all my life. I'm just saying that when people don't listen, it's not that they don't learn. They just deny themselves tremendous opportunities and glorious choices. Now, he uses it to talk about listening to an internal voice. I'm talking about using it to listen to something outside of you, like Naaseh v'nishma at Sinai. But what I'm trying to get across here is that the first step that the mask taught me was you don't have to speak. Maybe sometimes hold back, which I find difficult. The second step is this idea of responsive listening. And this is a little counterintuitive. But you know, when you're wearing a mask, and more important in this case, the other person is wearing a mask, it's harder to hear them. It's harder to understand what they're trying to say. You don't realize until you try to have a conversation in which both people are masked, how much we rely on facial expression to help us understand what the other person is saying. So now you have to pay attention more. You have to look for the crinkle lines around their eyes that say that they're, smiling, that this is actually something happy. Sometimes it's important because just you're talking to someone outside, you can't even hear that they're speaking because there's road noise and there are other people around or whatever it is. You need to pick up cues. You need to concentrate more, look for body language more. And so a second impact for me of wearing a mask is the other person wearing the mask, which is it forces me to become more of a responsive listener and to do what Alan Alda is describing, to do what Spielberg is describing, and ultimately to do what the Gemara is describing. When it talks about listening in order to be able to develop empathy, listening in order to be able to learn, listening to be influenced. And then the third and last part of this is speaking. Judaism emphasizes all over the place the importance of how we speak and choosing our words correctly. In the positive, we speak, we pray to God, we offer chizuk, encouragement for other people, we bring shalom, we bring peace between people, Talmud Torah, we learn Torah with other people. There are lots of positive ways to speak. And there are also negatives, right? There is harmful speech, lashon hara, motzi shem ra. There's rechilus, spreading information about others. There's onoas devarim, verbal abuse. There's the dishonesty and deceit, violating the mitzvah of hein tzedek, that your words should be fulfilled. You always have to be sincere when you speak and fulfill your commitments. Judaism places a huge emphasis on how we speak and making sure that we speak in the right way and not the wrong way. Well, success in that requires not only muting and not only this kind of active and responsive listening, but also intentional communication. There's a developmental stage for little kids where they go from communicating with the world by accident, conveying messages without knowing what they're doing, and intentionally trying to convey a message, sending messages on purpose. But the term applies to adults as well, because speech is more than just a way to vent what's inside. Speech is a way to influence other people, which requires that we choose our words well, and that we go even beyond that to choose our body language well. I brought you in the last source on the sheet, in source number 16, this piece from a fellow by the name of Nick Morgan. He's a communication coach. He writes for Forbes magazine about choosing body language. In this article, he talks about how he was speaking to a group of Harvard students. I feel bad because he maligns them a little bit, saying that they weren't really listening. And I feel like if you go to Harvard, you're sort of automatically expected to be at the top. And therefore, if you don't meet his standard, then he's going to malign you in his article. But he says, I was talking to them about intentional communication, and they didn't grasp what I was saying. But he goes on to say in the part I took, I appeal to the self-interest of Harvard students, as I do to all audiences on this subject. Wouldn't it be better to come across as focused, clear, and charismatic in your communications, rather than having your words and your actions say two different things? He's talking about body language here. The effect of aligned, fully present, emotionally focused communication is often profound and always optimal. You may not carry the day, but you will be sure to get a hearing. People will know where you stand. And the alternative is to tell two different stories with your content and body language, making yourself your worst enemy and almost guaranteeing that you won't succeed. So when a person is wearing a mask, now they're going to try to speak to others. They have to plan an economy of words. You know, you have to say to yourself, how can I speak in a way that people are actually going to get it across, knowing that it's hard for people to hear me, knowing that it's hard for people to understand? How do I choose my words wisely? How can I make sure this comes across to the listener clearly? What body language can I use that's going to support my message? So that, to me, is the third of these stages. I come back to what I said in the beginning. The idea expressed in the Zohar, and the idea expressed in Judaism in general, is that your neshama, your soul, is expressed in your speech. That's true for what you're trying to say, and it's true for what other people are trying to say to you. And therefore, it has to be valued. And when we really think about it in terms of that, this is my soul. This is the other person's soul. We are more apt to take the steps that we need to take in order to make sure we understand others and that others understand us, to be mute a little bit more, and thereby prevent the problems that come up with bad speech, reflect more, express humility, to listen more attentively, paying attention to body language, paying attention to what they're trying to say, so that we will empathize more, so that we will learn more, so that we will be influenced more, and to speak in a way that conveys more clearly what it is that we're trying to get across with our body language, with our careful choice of words. All three things. As I said to you in the beginning, this isn't chidushim. These aren't novelties. I'm sure that, at the time when I said it, there were 57. Now there are 77 screens. I'm sure that everybody on those screens could have intuited these ideas. But I think that it's really important that we take them seriously a week before Rosh Hashanah. Now, masks don't necessarily have a salutary effect, right? They can also make us impatient. They can make muting and listening and all that harder instead of easier. Let's not kid ourselves. It's our choice. But this can be a powerful tool for our success, to build achdus, to build unity, to build shalom bayis, peace in our homes, chizuk, strengthening of each other, education of our children, and all of that. Now we merit to fulfill this and thereby earn a ksiva v'chasima tova, to be inscribed and sealed for a year of health, a year of peace, a year of happiness. I will turn over the floor now to Rabbi Chaim Metzger for the next presentation. Thank you very much. And I apologize for not being quiet more and letting people speak, but half an hour to work with.